Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We want to thank you for being here with us. I'm here today with Edward Christie, and Edward will be speaking about an amazing topic, right, Edward? Blaise Pascal. I'm Marcia Trajano, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living. If you don't know about us, the Solitude Spiritist Center is a center that is completely virtual. We are working on different areas of activities, including study books, the study groups, as well as different types of lectures. And you are all welcome to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or Facebook and see everything that we're doing. I am very happy to be here and would like again to introduce, for those who do not know Edward Christie, he is a good friend, right, Edward? And I'm really, really excited to have you here. Edward has been involved with Spiritism, this body of work, that is extensive body of work, for more than 2 decades. And currently, he's an active member of the Inner Enlightenment Spiritist Society. Edward is also, and that's what moves me the most, Edward, is that he is classically trained pianist. He has taught music in New York City schools, and he also has taught computer science courses at the New York University. He enjoys learning and he uses his love of teaching to share what he has learned with others. So we're here, Edward, to hear from you, to learn from you, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to go to the background and thank you so very much, everyone, for being here with us.
Thank you, Mosi. Well, good morning, everyone, on this nice winter morning, talking about a very warm topic, a topic that is close to my heart these days, about Blaise Pascal and his. And I've titled this lecture "The Heart's Search for God," and we'll find out why as it goes on. So, and if you heard the name Blaise Pascal and you said to yourself, "Excuse me, Blaise who?" You can be forgiven because you're not alone. But I hope that after our time together today, you'll get to know a little something about the man. He's a complex and fascinating figure. And although he was born in France 400 years ago this past June, he has much to say to us today that's still valuable. And that's why we're talking about him. Just a few biographical notes on Blaise. His mother died when he was just 3 years old. His father was a government official and introduced Blaise to many major scientists and mathematicians working in France. He was a child prodigy, and his father educated him. Today we would call him homeschooled, and gave him a lifelong love of learning. Personally, Pascal never traveled outside of France. He never married. He was ill for much of his life with severe intestinal pains and violent headaches. His older sister said that for the last 20 years of his life, he didn't spend one day without physical discomfort. And when he died at age 39, an autopsy revealed that he had stomach cancer, a diseased liver, and brain lesions. Despite all his poor health, Pascal was a very busy man. Here are just a few of his contributions. As a mathematician, he developed probability theory, which is used today in economics, as well as to assess risk in insurance, pensions, finance, and investments. As a physicist, he helped to prove that vacuums exist. Aristotle had said that a vacuum in nature is impossible. Pascal designed experiments proving that vacuums do exist. As an inventor, he designed a calculating machine he called the Pascaline. See, Pascal's father's job involved exhaustive calculations of taxes that were owed and paid. And he wanted to help his father in his work, so he designed a digital calculating machine. Looks nothing like our computers now, and it wasn't electronic, of course, since this predates electricity use. But his computer could add, subtract, multiply, and divide. As a writer, he is most famously known for his Pensées, which is French for thoughts. Pascal planned to write a book named A Defense of the Christian Religion, and in it, Pascal wanted to explore the problem of human nature. He found human life a mystery beyond reason. He was dissatisfied with the meaning of human life unless a spiritual explanation could be found. And we're going to spend most of our time today looking at Blaise Pascal's Pensées. In 1654, when Blaise was 31 years old, he had an experience that set his life on a new course. On the night of November 23rd, he went to his room and locked the door. He was alone, reading from the Gospel of John. And in his imagination, he saw Jesus the night before he was crucified. Pascal reflected on what Jesus had done on the cross for him and all of humanity. This experience converted him, had such a profound effect that over the next 4 years, he slowly gave up his work in science and experimentation, as well as his desire to get married, and dedicated himself to working for the betterment of humanity. How would he do this? Well, he intended to write a book defending the Christian faith and began writing his thoughts for this book on pieces of paper. He didn't live long enough to write the book. So instead, what we have are almost 1,000 notes that he wrote for that book. And after his death, his friends assembled these notes into a collection that we call the Pensées, which simply means Pascal's thoughts. The book was to have two parts. In part one, Pascal wanted to talk about the misery of man without God. Pascal didn't want to give us a set of moral principles that tell us how to live our lives. Instead, he wanted to show us the truths about ourselves as humans that would create a sense of humility and would lead us to seek and love God. He showed us that no matter how hard we try, we're unable to heal human suffering on our own, and without God, our lives are miserable. In part two, Pascal wants to show us the happiness of man with God. A God that created the universe and a system of reward and punishment might give us reasons to obey him, but not to love him. So Pascal doesn't waste our time trying to convince us that God exists by offering us proof. That's because it's not the lack of proof that God exists that stops us from having faith in him. No, it's our unwillingness to seek God in humility. And how do we do this? We strengthen our faith in God by turning to scripture and prayer so that we can become the kind of person who wants to seek God. Now, before we start our examination of Pascal's Pensées, I'd like to make 3 introductory remarks to help us understand what we're going to hear. First is the style of the Pensée. As you listen, you're going to hear Pascal's mind at work. Thoughts he writes just as they occur to him. He's not looking to give you a lot of abstract concepts about what it means to be a human being. Instead, he's talking directly to you, describing to you how you're diverting yourself from your own true nature so that you can reorient your life to think about it in a new way. Second is Pascal's purpose in telling you what he wants you to hear. Now, when I first read the Pensées, I misunderstood Pascal. I thought of him as a moralist, wagging his finger at me for the useless way I lived my life. But now that I've spent more time reading his thoughts, I see him in a new light. He wants us to understand the human condition and see that our lives are meaningful only when we turn to God. It's only by seeking God that our lives can make any kind of sense. And lastly, keep an open mind as you listen to Pascal. Some of his thoughts may challenge you, and you may not even like or agree with what he says. My intention here is to be faithful to what Pascal wants to tell us, even if some of his ideas are hard to accept. Let Pascal's Pensées raise questions for you, but hear him out before deciding how to judge his thoughts. So let's begin. Let's look at Pascal's mind at work and hear how he reveals that the true meaning of our lives can only be found when we center it on God. In part one, Pascal shows us how our day-to-day material life is one of misery. He has a genius for making real the many ways this is true. We'll examine just three of these ways. First, how our imagination is stronger than our reason. Second, our endless desire for diversions. And thirdly, how self-love blinds us to the truth. So, one way Pascal shows us the reality and truth about our human condition is by exposing the limits of reason. We think of ourselves as rational beings, and we are. But reason gives us the ability to seek the truth, yet next to imagination, reason is weak. It's our imagination and not our reason that plays a far greater role in human affairs. So here's one of Pascal's Pensées. Would you not say that this magistrate, whose venerable age commands the respect of a whole people, is governed by pure and lofty reason, and that he judges causes according to their true nature, without considering those mere trifles which only affect the imagination of the weak? See him go to sermon, full of devout zeal, strengthening his reason with the ardor of his love. He's ready to listen with exemplary respect. Let the preacher appear, and let nature have given him a hoarse voice, or a comical cast of countenance, or let his barber have given him a bad shave, or let by chance his dress be more dirty than usual, then however great the truths he announces, I wager our senator loses his gravity. So Pascal's saying that this magistrate is an educated and mature man. We think of him as a reasonable person who can judge fairly whether someone is speaking the truth. But even that magistrate can hear the truth of what the preacher says if the preacher doesn't look the part. His reason is pushed to the side, and he can't take what the preacher says seriously because the preacher's appearance doesn't match his imagination of what a preacher should look like. I often say if I wore, those glasses with the funny nose and I gave this lecture, could you take me seriously? Regardless, if even with the same things that I'm saying. So love or hate alters the aspect of justice. How much greater confidence has an advocate retained with a large fee in the justice of his cause? How much better does his bold manner make his case appear to judges, deceived as they are by appearances? How ludicrous is our reason, blown with a breath in every direction. Pascal's given us the idea that, we see a person pass us by and feel nothing towards him, but put on a judge's robe and we immediately have great respect for him. Our imagination gives us the idea that the person is far from ordinary just because of how they're dressed. In the same way, we have confidence in doctors because they wear a white coat, carry a stethoscope. Think about it. Would you think a doctor capable in her profession if she walked into the examination room dressed for the beach? Does the way she's dressed say anything about her knowledge and ability? No, we wouldn't believe her in the same way because it's our imagination at work, and reason is playing little or no part in our judgment. A second way Pascal shows us the reality and truth about our human condition is to show our love of diversions. We have an almost addictive orientation for mindless forms of entertainment and amusement. Diversions distract us from our fears and worries. Entertainment keeps our mind focused on anything but the true condition of our lives. So here's Pascal. When I have occasionally set myself to consider the different distractions of men, the pains and perils to which they expose themselves at court or in war, whence arrive so many quarrels, passions, bold and often bad ventures, etc., I have discovered that all the unhappiness of men arises from one single fact, that they cannot stay quietly in their own chamber. What does our constant need for distractions tell us? That we feel something's missing in our life. And we want to forget this emptiness by staying busy. Left alone with our thoughts, we're restless and will do most anything to be distracted from the poverty of our internal life. As Viktor Frankl said, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. Here's Pascal again. The only thing which consoles us for our miseries is diversion, and yet this is the greatest of our miseries. Now, if someone took away all your distractions and amusements, you'd be aware of your misery. If we're not occupied with some diversion, we're anxious and unhappy and we'll do whatever it takes to keep from feeling this misery. What is it then that this desire and this inability proclaim to us, but that there was once in man a true happiness, of which there now remains to him only the mark, an empty trace, which he in vain tries to fill from all his surroundings, seeking from things absent the help that he does not obtain in things present? But these are all inadequate because the infinite abyss can only be filled by an infinite and immutable object, that is to say, only by God himself. So let's ask ourselves, do diversions really make me happy? Now, it's tempting to answer, of course they do. Otherwise, why would I spend money and time on them? Think about what I spend on sporting events, concerts, theater, travel, games. Think of the time I spend binge watching shows, reading the news, scrolling through social media, and searching for deals on the internet. I freely spend time and money and then say, this is what life's all about. I'm living the dream, and it doesn't get any better than this. But the honest answer is that diversions do not make us happy. I want diversions to fill a void in me that's infinite, a God-sized hole. But I'll never find satisfaction by filling that hole with infinite objects, with finite objects, sorry. Here's Pascal again. Death is easier to bear without thinking of it than is the thought of death without peril. In other words, Pascal's saying we'd rather ignore death because when we're thinking about dying peacefully, it means that we have to admit that one day we're going to die. And in small ways and large, we've taken on a project in this life. We hope we'll live forever. We look for any way to distract ourselves from the fact that we will die. And that's what distractions do. Author and playwright William Saroyan said it best. Everybody has got to die, but I've always believed that an exception would be made in my case. A third way Pascal shows us the reality and truth about our human condition is to challenge the idea that we really want to know the truth about ourselves. We're dependent beings and we're not perfect. And yet we deceive ourselves by thinking that we're better than we are. And we want others to believe this lie. Now, here's Pascal. But what will man do? He cannot prevent this object that he loves from being full of faults and wants. He wants to be great, and he sees himself small. He wants to be happy, and sees himself miserable. He wants to be perfect, and he sees himself full of imperfections. He wants to be the object of love and esteem among men, and he sees that his faults merit only their hatred and contempt. So, because of self-love, I want to see myself as great, perfect, and worthy of admiration. But in a quiet moment, I see only my smallness, my imperfection, and my unworthiness. Truly, it is an evil to be full of faults, but it is still greater evil to be full of them and to be unwilling to recognize them, since that is to add the further fault of a voluntary illusion. We do not like others to deceive us. We do not think that it's fair that they should be held in higher esteem by us than they deserve. It is not then fair that we should deceive them and should wish them to esteem us more highly than we deserve. Thus, when they discover only the imperfections and vices which we really have, it's plain that they do us no wrong, since it's not they who cause them. They rather do us good, since they help to free ourselves from an evil, namely, the ignorance of these imperfections. We ought not to be angry at their knowing our faults and despising us. It is but right that they should know us for what we are and should despise us if we're contemptible. Such are the feelings that would arise in a heart full of equity and justice. So Pascal's saying, when others point out an imperfection in me, we can't be certain that they're looking to hurt or put me down. What they're telling is at least partially true, so they're showing me something about myself that I can't see. And if I can't see my imperfections, how will I ever learn the truth about myself? In a heart full of equity and justice, as Pascal points out here, I would say, thank you for telling me some truth about myself. This is what people who transform their lives want to hear. They learn the truth about themselves, and their heart begins to change. Here's what Marcus Aurelius says on the subject. If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. I seek the truth which never harmed anyone. The harm is to persist in one's own self-deception and ignorance. Now, there are many other ways that Pascal shows us the truth about our human condition, but the three ways we've seen, the power of imagination over reason, our love of diversion, and the deceit of self-love, might lead us to think that there's really little hope for human happiness. But Pascal doesn't tell us these truths to leave us in a state of despair. He also wants to show that humans have a special place in the universe because we're thinking beings. Here's Pascal. The greatest of man is great. The greatness of man is great in that he knows himself to be miserable. A tree does not know itself to be miserable. It is then being miserable to know oneself to be miserable. But it is also being great to know that one is miserable. So Pascal's pointing out here that we have two sides to our nature. One is the poverty of our human condition, and the other is our greatness because we're thinking beings. And we live in between these two conditions, aware of both our misery and our greatness. Pascal is exposing the conflict that lives deep inside us. We have a need for truth, but our best thoughts don't give us the complete truth. We want to be happy, yet we always fall short. This is the fundamental nature of the human condition. We want truth, happiness, but we can't get these desires by ourselves. And this is what makes us miserable creatures. Here's Pascal again. It is dangerous to make man see too clearly his equality with the brutes without showing him his greatness. It is also dangerous to make him see his greatness too clearly apart from his vileness. It is still more dangerous to leave him in ignorance of both. But it is very advantageous to show him both. Man must not think that he is on the level either with the brutes or with the angels, nor must he be ignorant of both sides of his nature, but he must know both. So Pascal's saying there are three errors that we can make rather when we look at what it means to be human. First, we can be aware of human misery without seeing human greatness. And when we see only our misery, we're tempted to despair. Life is a long chain of sorrows and pains, and there's no escape and ultimately no meaning to life. Or we can be aware of human greatness without seeing human misery. And when we see only our greatness, we're tempted to be prideful. I got it all together, my life is great. Or the third way is we can be ignorant of both our misery and our greatness. And this, Pascal says, is the most dangerous position because this is the life of an animal, unaware of either side of our human nature. Man is but a reed, the most feeble thing in nature, but he is a thinking reed. The entire universe need not arm itself to crush him. A vapor, a drop of water suffices to kill him. But if the universe were to crush him, man would still be more noble than that which killed him, because he knows that he dies and the advantage which the universe has over him. The universe knows nothing of this. All our dignity consists then in thought. By it, we must elevate ourselves, and not by space and time which we cannot fill. Let us endeavor then to think well. This is the principle of morality. So Pascal's saying the greatness of man consists in his ability to think, and yet thinking doesn't make us invincible. We can die, we can snap like a reed, we crush like a blade of grass at any second. Human life is fragile, and the smallest thing can kill us in a moment. But knowing this is what makes humans greater than anything that can kill us. We're almost nothing in comparison to the universe. And yet humans are great because we know this. And as thinking beings, we can live a moral life. This is the power of thought and the source of human greatness. A human greatness is more than the fact that we're thinking creatures. We can know or justify our belief in God by reason, but this kind of knowledge is intellectual. We do, however, have a second faculty. It has a loving knowledge of God. It is through the heart that we love God. Pascal says, it is the heart which experiences God and not the reason. This then is faith, God felt by the heart, not by the reason. So Pascal's saying we have two different faculties to know and love God. Reason is one tool, but there are many things that we can't know through reason alone. Reason can give us intellectual knowledge of God, but it's only the heart that can love God. And it's through faith that we have the ability to love God. The heart that Pascal is talking about isn't an emotion or part of our animal brain. It's the core of human beings. our center that connects us to God. Here's Pascal again. The heart has its reasons which reason does not know. Is it by reason that you love yourself? So, reason and the heart, as we said, are two sources of belief, and they work together. Reason knows God and accepts that as thinking beings we're limited. The heart loves God with its humility. We admit that we can't save ourselves, but a loving God can. The heart has its own order, and the intellect has its own, which is by principle and demonstration. The heart has another. We do not prove that we ought to be loved by enumerating in order the causes of love. That would be ridiculous. So Pascal's telling us rational proofs convince the mind, but not the heart. Think of someone you love. If someone asks you why you love that person, and you gave a list of the person's qualities, would that be proof of your love? And if you love that person only for their qualities, ask yourself, do you love the person or only her qualities? Finally, Pascal says that the knowledge of God is very far from the love of him. It's not knowing knowledge, but loving knowledge of God that we're after. An intellectual knowledge of God is knowledge about God. Knowledge about God is good, but it's not enough because the heart doesn't want to know about. The heart wants to experience love. The heart doesn't go looking for an object called God. Instead, it responds to God's love with a patient, humble desire to come close to him. This doesn't mean spending your days concentrating on a concept of God. That would be intellectual. Instead, we keep an awareness of our love of God. And you can find simple ways to do this, such as saying a short prayer throughout the day as you go about your activities. So that's part one. In part two of the Pensées, Pascal wants to show us the way out of our misery. Part one showed us that we can't reach the good on our own, and that without God, our life is marked by anxiety, dissatisfaction. So, what does Pascal offer to us? So, if I'm inclined to believe in God, then Pascal can offer me proofs from the Bible to strengthen my faith. What if I'm a non-believer? Well, in this case, there's no proof that Pascal can offer to convince me to believe in God. Instead, he presents one of the most talked about ideas of the Pensées, known as Pascal's wager. This wager is a bet or a gamble. In the wager, a person bets for or against belief in God. The wager isn't meant to give us convincing proof of God's existence, but to make the non-believer see that it's smart to bet that God exists. So here's Pascal. If there is a God, he is infinitely incomprehensible, since having neither parts nor limits, he has no affinity to us. We are then incapable of knowing either what he is or if he is. So there are a number of philosophical arguments for God's existence. For example, in the Spirit's book, question 4 is this: where can the proof of God's existence be found? And the answer is in a premise that's applied in science. There is no cause, there's no effect, there is no effect without a cause. Now, in philosophy, this is known as the cosmological argument that says that everything that begins had a cause. The universe couldn't have brought itself into existence out of nothing. This means that someone created it, and that someone we call God. Now, Some people might be convinced by this argument, but that doesn't mean that they know who or what God is, or even whether God exists. And just as important, it doesn't explain how we're related to Him. Let us examine this point and say God is or He is not. But to which side shall we incline? Reason can decide nothing here. There's an infinite chaos which separated us. A game is being played at the extremity of this infinite distance where heads or tails will turn up. What will you wager? According to reason, you can do neither one thing nor the other. According to reason, you can defend neither of the propositions. So Pascal is saying, theological arguments might sound reasonable, but reason alone can't prove that God exists. And yet, either God does exist or God doesn't exist. Pascal tells us the true course is not to wager at all. Yes, but you must wager. It is not optional. You are embarked. So now, what if the gambler says, I don't want to play this game. I don't want to bet. Pascal says, you have already wagered. And that shows in how you live your life day to day. You're searching for something. What are you seeking? Therefore, you're forced to bet for or against God's existence. And when we bet, there's an equal risk of winning or losing. It's 50-50. And reason can't help us because there's no evidence that can prove it either way. So the smart gambler wagers based on his self-interest. In this case, Pascal tells us that it's foolish to bet against God, and here's why. This is a little illustration of the decision-making process. Let's start with the green box at the bottom that says wagering God does not exist. If I wager there's no God and I'm right, if I win the bet because God doesn't exist, what do I win? Nothing. A few years worth of temporary pleasures, and when I die, my existence disappears into the void. Now, if I wager that there's no God and I'm wrong, and God does exist, and of course, the word exists was spelled correctly, what do I lose? I lose an infinite good, that is, an eternity with God, and suffer the consequences of living a life without believing in God, which is to be separated from Him. Now let's look at the green box that says wagering God exists. If I wager that there is a God and I'm wrong because God doesn't exist, what do I lose? I don't lose anything. I lose a brief life of missed opportunities and creature comforts and pleasures and luxuries. But if I wager that there is a God and I'm right, if I win the bet because God exists, what do I win? I gain an infinite reward, an eternity with God, at the expense of temporary pleasures I might have had to give up during my mortal life. With this wager, I win more than any other choice. This is where the smart gambler places his bet. Okay, so now the gambler says, oh, it's in my self-interest to wager that God exists, but still, the gambler asks, is there no means of seeing the faces of the cards? The gambler is saying, isn't there a way to stack the deck to get better than 50-50 odds? Yes, Pascal says. The cards can be turned up in two ways, and both of these ways require the gambler to take a new perspective on his life. First, Pascal says, the will is one of the chief factors in belief. Not that it creates belief, but because things are true or false according to the aspect in which we look at them. So Pascal's telling us that belief gives us a point of view, an understanding of what's true and false, so we can have a firsthand loving experience of God. Once our will points us in the right direction, our heart is ready to seek God. Prayer is how God's will and our will work together. Prayer brings together our misery and our greatness. Our misery makes us seek God in humility, and the greatness of humans as thinking beings brings us to understand our need for God. So the will is one way. The second way is by reading scripture, which allows us to strengthen our faith. Now, we're going to just take a brief look at the prophecies and the miracles, which is what Pascal is using to base our faith on. So, prophecies. Pascal says, we know God only by Jesus Christ. Without this mediator, all communion with God is taken away. Through Jesus Christ, we know God. All those who have claimed to know God and to prove him without Jesus Christ have had only weak proofs. But in the proof of Jesus Christ, we have the prophecies, which are solid and palpable proofs. In the Gospels, Jesus speaks of prophecies. He says things like, "For it is written," and "This was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Pascal believed that the fulfillment of the Old and New Testament prophecies were signs that anyone could see. If you're a non-believer, you can read scripture and see God's guiding hand in history. Jesus is the heart of the Old Testament prophecies because in him, the prophecies are fulfilled. Spiritism says this about prophecies. But the role of Jesus was not simply that of a moralist legislator, merely offering his word as exclusive authority. It fell to him to complete the prophecies, which had announced his advent by means of the exceptional nature of his spirit and his divine mission. You can find that in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And in Genesis, we read, the faculty of foretelling the future is one of the attributes of the soul and is explained by the theory of foresight or prophecy. Jesus possessed it like all other gifts of the soul to an eminent degree. He has then been able to foretell the events which would follow his death without in this act doing anything supernatural. So the Bible and Spiritism agree that the fulfillment of the prophecies show that God is at work in our life. Now, miracles are another way to see God's governing the events of our lives. Miracles are confronting to the modern scientific mind, but they're documented events in both the Old and New Testament. To fully discuss miracles, we need an entirely separate study, but let's look briefly at how the Bible and Spiritism views them. Jesus, in the Gospel of John, says, "Do not believe me unless I do what my Father does. But if I do it, even though you don't believe me, believe the miracles, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me and I am in the Father." So, like the prophecies, Pascal read the miracles of the Old and New Testament literally. Miracles are not natural events, but signs from God showing that he is God and that a believer is right to have faith in him. We will never be able to understand miracles using our reason alone. We need faith to believe them. Now, Spiritism takes a different view. Spiritism says this: God does not perform miracles. Since his laws are perfect, he has no need to derogate them. If there are some facts which we do not understand, it is because we have not the necessary knowledge to comprehend them. So as you can see, we need a much deeper, much more focused discussion to see where the Bible and Spiritism meet and where they differ. But for now, let's leave it at this. And one of the reasons we're talking about Pascal is that he's a spirit of truth worker, that is, a worker for Jesus. And he contributed 2 entries in the Gospel according to Spiritism. Here are 2 excerpts from these communications. In the chapter, Love Your Neighbor as Yourself, Pascal gave this communication. If mankind loved one another mutually, then charity would be better practiced. However, so this can happen, it is necessary to shed the armored plate that covers your hearts in order that they may become sensitive to the sufferings of others. Christ never avoided anyone, nor did he repel those who came in search of him, whoever they might be. He helped the adulterous woman and the criminal, never fearing that his reputation might suffer as a consequence. When will you take him as your model for all your actions? If charity reigned on earth, then evil could not prevail. It would fade away in shame. It would hide itself, seeing that wherever it went, it would feel out of place. Pascal, in this entry, is asking us to be charitable to everyone without distinction, as Jesus was, especially to those who are easy to ignore or seemingly unworthy. Pascal not only wrote these words, he lived them. Here's just a small sample of his charitable work. While he was writing the Pensées, Pascal invited a poor family that had smallpox to stay in his home while he went to live with his sister. He also rescued a young street girl. And famously, he created a plan to have horse-drawn carriages circulate in Paris over fixed routes at regular intervals throughout the day. This was the first public transportation system in Europe. Pascal made sure it was available to everyone by charging only a few cents for each ride. And part of the proceeds went to the poor who were suffering from famine. In this entry, though it's not shown here, he also reminds us that those who are selfish and prideful are in a contest where the only way to win is by being deceitful. Selfishness is a total denial of charity, and without it, we could not rest or feel safe. Therefore, be examples of charity by giving to all without distinction. In the second entry, in the chapter, It's Not Possible to Serve Both God and Mammon, Pascal gave this communication. What then constitutes true property? Nothing that is for the use of the body, but everything that is for the use of the soul, such as intelligence, knowledge, and moral qualities. This is what a man brings and takes with him, which no one can take away, and which will be of far greater use in the next world than in the present one. It's up to him to be richer on departure than he was on arrival in this world, seeing that his future position will depend solely on what qualities have been gained in the present life. No one will be asked what it was they had on earth or what position they had occupied, nor even if they were a pauper or a prince. Instead, they will be asked what they have brought with them. Neither worldly goods nor titles will be evaluated, only this total sum of virtues acquired. So in this communication, Pascal offers an analogy between someone who's traveling to a distant country and someone who's arriving in the spiritual world. Both travelers will bring only those things they need for the journey. And when they arrive, they'll need a place to stay. The quality of the place they can afford will depend on what they have brought with them. For the traveler, how much money he has. And for the discarnate, the qualities of his soul. That is, the virtues he possesses and how much he's done for others during his earthly life. Again, Pascal didn't just write these words, he lived them. Near the end of his life, Pascal sold his horses and carriage, his household furnishings and books, and gave the proceeds to the poor. Let's hear what prompted him to do this. I love poverty because he loved it. I love riches because they afford me the means of helping the very poor. I kept faith with everybody. I do not render evil to those who wrong me, but I wish them a lot like mine, in which I receive neither good nor evil nor good from men. I try to be just, true, sincere, and faithful to all men. I have a tender heart for those to whom God has more closely united me, and whether I am alone or seen of men, I do all my actions in the sight of God, who must judge all of them, and to whom I have consecrated them all. These are my sentiments, and every day of my life I bless my Redeemer, who has implanted them in me, and who, of a man full of weaknesses, of miseries, of lust, of pride, and of ambition, has made a man free from all these evils by the power of his grace, to which all the glory of it is due. As to myself, I have only misery and error. Read the Pensées. It's one of those desert island texts that reveal the new insights each time we pick it up. We heard just a handful of Pascal's thoughts and touched on some of the major themes, but there's so much more in the Pensée. Pick it up when you need a moment to stop and think about your life. If something you read is unclear or confusing, just move on to Pascal's next thought. But if something touches you because of its beauty or because it's unsettling, you can put the book down and reflect on it. Let Pascal bring you to a place where you can meet yourself face to face. Let his words create in you a sense of humility that gets you to look at your life in a new way, one that fuels your desire, the desire of your heart to want and seek God. I thank you for your kind attention.
I'm so happy to be here with you, Edward. I appreciate all that you brought to us. And it is incredible to see so many pearls of wisdom, some thoughts that are really so well put together, right? And if you can think about it, 1600s to the 2020s, right? It is quite a vast, and yet, as you mentioned in the beginning, very current, very interesting, and it touches all of us. I think, especially for those that consider themselves spiritists. But I wanted to, at this point, Edward, just give us a time to ask you for one more thing before we say goodbye.
Certainly.
Would you be so kind to give us a prayer, and then we close for our Seeds of Knowledge lecture of the day.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank each other for this community that we create where we share our understanding and our ideas, where we know we can't do it without you and we can't do it without each other. Let us stay open minded always to the understanding and the progress that each one of us make in this life so that we may learn and understand more about ourselves and more about you, especially, so our hearts can open up as we've been asked to do so many times, to create a sense of humility, to create a sense of desire and want to understand and be close to you. And so be it.
So be it. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, everyone who's here with us, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.